Do not critique the pharmaceutical industry. There's nothing to see there. And if you question them, you are a conspiracy theorist. Let's have a look at the British Medical Journal. Those wacky conspiracy theorists have been looking at evidence-based medicine. The conspiracy theorists. Hello there, you 5.4 million awakening wonders. Thank you for joining us on this voyage to truth together. I know there will be moments of doubt. I know there will be challenges ahead, but together we can surmount them. Hey, if you're not a subscriber to my mailing list yet, please click on the link and become a subscriber so I can reach you directly and tell you about my tours and my live events and all sorts of other stuff. And if in the event anything changed, I would have direct connections to you, which is vital for me. I'm still live all over the UK. If you want to come and see me live, there's a link in the description for that. And of course, I'll tell you about that in the emails once you've signed up for it. Let's have a look at this interesting story from the British Medical Journal. Now, a lot on this channel, we talk about medicine, policies around medicine, regulations around the pandemic, for example, always careful only to convey information that's been published elsewhere in reputable publications, some of which you consider to be most dubious because they're what you would refer to as the legacy or corporate media. But in this case, we're looking at the British Medical Journal, who are talking about evidence-based medicine. And we'll be asking, do you think an industry that spends $5 billion a year on advertising sometimes doesn't face diligent criticism from the media that they basically fund? In 2020, the pharmaceutical industry spent $4.5 billion on advertising on national TV in the United States, representing a shift in spending compared to the 2019 pre-COVID market. That's interesting. Around the time of the pandemic, the pharmaceutical industry really stepped up its advertising. You'd think during the pandemic, people were pretty much aware of what products were required and what was necessary without going on the telly hawking the stuff. In 2020, TV ad spending of the pharma industry accounted for 75% of the total ad spend. Of all advertising that you are subjected to, 75% of it comes from the pharmaceutical industry. Does that seem like an astonishingly high number? I can't help but think that maybe that gives them influence beyond just the airing of the commercials, because they're supporting the entire economic model upon which the media is founded. So we know the relationships between big pharma, the media, and the government are deluged in finance. These relationships are muddied because of lobbying and advertising money. Recently revealed documents suggest that all of our assumptions about the underwriting of evidence-based medicine are not being critically reviewed. This is from the British Medical Journal. It reveals that many of our assumptions about, oh, well, it's science, it's all peer-reviewed, there's nothing to question. Well, apparently it's not that simple. New emergent documents reveal that we need to pay more attention to what we've previously assumed to be true about medical models and the medicines we're prescribed. This is from research leader John Giardini and Professor Emeritus Lehman B. McHenry at the BMJ. The advent of evidence-based medicine was a paradigm shift intended to provide a solid scientific foundation for medicine. The validity of this new paradigm, however, depends on reliable data from clinical trials, most of which are conducted by the pharmaceutical industry and reported in the names of senior academics. The release into the public domain of previously confidential pharmaceutical industry documents has given the medical community valuable insight into the degree to which industry-sponsored clinical trials are misrepresented. Until this problem is corrected, evidence-based medicine will remain an illusion. The philosophy of critical rationalism, advanced by the philosopher Karl Popper, famously advocated for the integrity of science and its role in an open democratic society. A science of real integrity would be one in which practitioners are careful not to cling to cherished hypotheses and take seriously the outcome of the most stringent experiments. What I like about that sentence is, remember, if you can, the atmosphere around the pandemic. Trust the science. Follow the science. It was used as ideological leverage to create compliance. Because, of course, if something is empirically, definitely, indubitably true, there's no point in questioning it. If we're dealing with absolute facts, then we can relax. These are the facts. This is what you have to do. These are the medicines you have to take. We've done the science. We've done the research. There's no other factors at play. No one's trying to make money. No one's trying to get undue power or influence. That's what I suppose science diligently undertaken affords us a kind of certainty. But we have to, of course, have faith and trust that these scientific models are in the hands of people that are behaving with moral integrity, not just using the veil of science and the language of science to pursue a particular agenda. Let's look more deeply at what's been revealed through these documents to see if these questions and this line of inquiry is valid. This ideal is, however, threatened by corporations in which financial interests trump the common good. Medicine is largely dominated by a small number of very large pharmaceutical companies that compete for market share, but are effectively united in their efforts to expanding that market. The short-term stimulus to biomedical research because of privatization has been celebrated by free market champions, but the unintended long-term consequences for medicine have been severe. Scientific progress is thwarted by the ownership of data and knowledge because industry suppresses negative trial results, fails to report adverse events, and does not share raw data with the academic research community. Okay, so if we're talking purely about science, which means the observation and reporting of facts, it would seem vital that you don't suppress negative trial results. Oh, this didn't work out well. Suppress it! That doesn't seem like the kind of transparency required in an ethical and effective scientific model. Failing to report adverse events. What could be more important than, oh, the trial was negative and there were some adverse events. When people took this medicine, there were consequences, there were complications, there are side effects. You can see, of course, that there is an incentive not to report negative trial results or adverse events if your real agenda, if your real objective is to make money. And of course, if you're a giant pharmaceutical company, you do have to make money. So we're not talking about science anymore. We're talking about a corporate agenda. What's being revealed is that science in this context is a subset of a drive for profit. And if the real intention is the accumulation of wealth and the accumulation of power, then the scientific veil becomes obfuscating rather than transparent. Patients die because of the adverse impact of commercial interests on the research agenda, university and regulators. There were some side effects to this medicine. Go on. Well, some of the patients did, how can I say, they stopped moving about and breathing and stuff. Do you mean they died? Yes, that's it. Write that down. Write that down. Hold on. Do you work for us? No, I'm independent. Then you can't see that. The pharmaceutical industry's responsibility to its shareholders means that priority must be given to their hierarchical power structures, product loyalty, and public relations propaganda over scientific integrity. Although universities have always been elite institutions prone to influence through endowments, they have long laid claim to being guardians of truth and the moral conscience of society. Don't you think whenever you see like universities and like on the telly, and there's people in mortarboards and black capes and sort of busts and like it all looks like Hogwarts and Harry Potter. Ah, look at our prestigious institutions. That pageantry is meant to suggest authority and integrity, like the British royal family. Look at our ermine robes. Look at our crowns. But often, in my opinion, pageantry, livery, and the paraphernalia of authority and power is often there to mask the real agenda. In this case, there are entrenched financial interests that are being represented behind all them wacky mortarboards and all those ceremonies and robes and silks and all that pride. I'm not saying that universities and all academics and professors are all liars and duffers, but I'm saying that when you hear the word university, it's a kind of brand. You get a kind of brand recognition that brings about trust and authority, just in the same way that Coca-Cola or Nike or Facebook elicits a certain response. Well, apparently in some cases, the nature of their funding suggests that we could be a little more circumspect before assuming that these are institutions of integrity, because they're influenced through their funding in the same way that a congressperson might be influenced through lobbying. But in the face of inadequate government funding, they have adopted a neoliberal market approach, actively seeking pharmaceutical funding on commercial terms. I've said many times to you before that we live in a deeply entrenched ideological system, so vast and all-encompassing that we are unable to analyse it because we are immersed within it. Universities are now a subset of neoliberal ideology. Their funding means that their priorities can no longer be epistemological integrity. They have to do what's necessary for them financially. As a result, university departments become instruments of industry. Through company control of the research agenda and ghostwriting of medical journal articles and continuing medical education, academics become free agents for the promotion of commercial products. When scandals involving industry-academe partnerships are exposed in the mainstream media, trust in academic institutions is weakened and the vision of an open society is betrayed. The corporate university also compromises the concept of academic leadership. Deans who reach their leadership positions by virtue of distinguished contributions to their disciplines have been replaced with fundraisers and academic managers who are forced to demonstrate their profitability or show how they can attract corporate sponsors. In medicine, those who succeed in academia are likely to be key opinion leaders, KOLs in marketing parlance, whose careers can be advanced through the opportunities provided by industry. Potential KOLs are selected based on a complex array of profiling activities carried out by companies. For example, physicians are selected based on their influence on prescribing habits of other physicians. KOLs are sought out by industry for this influence and for the prestige that their university affiliation brings to the branding of the company's products. As well-paid members of pharmaceutical advisory boards and speakers bureaus, KOLs present results of industry trials at medical conferences and in continuing medical education. Instead of acting as independent, disinterested scientists and critically evaluating a drug's performance, they become what marketing executives refer to as product champions. So the pharmaceutical industry has essentially franchised universities into their marketing arm by incentivizing them financially and removing the kind of academic integrity that would previously have been there through various streams of influence executed by donations and through financial incentives. Ironically, industry-sponsored KOLs appear to enjoy many of the advantages of academic freedom, supported as they are by their universities, the industry, and journal editors for expressing their views, even when those views are incongruent with the real evidence. While universities fail to correct misrepresentations of the science from such collaborations, critics of industry face rejections from journals, legal threats, and the potential destruction of their careers. Potential critics of the pharmaceutical agenda are eliminated and kept in line. In the same way, I suppose that our cultural space is becoming marshalled and managed by codes and laws, and so that you don't feel confident speaking in public anymore, the world of academia has been colonized by pharmaceutical interests. This uneven playing field is exactly what concerned Popper when he wrote about suppression and control of the means of science communication. The preservation of institutions designed to further scientific objectivity and impartiality, i.e. public laboratories, independent scientific periodicals and congresses, is entirely at the mercy of political and commercial power. Vested interest will always override the rationality of evidence. So I suppose the key assumption that we make about science and the information that we receive within that milieu is being undermined. They will overlook the rationality of evidence in favour of vested interest. That's the opposite of what we're invited to trust in. What I find frustrating is that whenever there is inquiry into the domain of science, particularly industrialised science, commercialised science, the world of big pharma, you are called a conspiracy theorist, a lunatic, when it's clear that the entire model is designed to shut down inquiry and to present products in a favourable light, not because of scientific integrity, but because of commercial opportunity. Regulators receive funding from industry and use industry-funded and performed trials to approve drugs without, in most cases, seeing the raw data. How can you regulate something if you're funded by it and you haven't seen the data that you're approving? What confidence do we have in a system in which drug companies are permitted to mark their own homework rather than having their products tested by independent experts as part of a public regulatory system? Unconcerned governments and captured regulators are unlikely to initiate necessary change to remove research from industry altogether and clean up publishing models that depend on reprint revenue, advertising and sponsorship revenue. So what the British Medical Journal are doing is taking a deep look at the way that the industry actually functions. The accreditation that they receive from university is biased because the universities are often funded by those pharmaceutical companies. The independent regulators are not independent. They're funded by the pharmaceutical industry. We already know that the media receives the majority of its advertising revenue from the pharmaceutical industry. So suddenly something that we are told to appreciate as scientific, as rational, as in some cases literally beyond question, and if you do question it, you're a conspiracy theorist, is in fact a tied up industry where every single facet of it is controlled by people that are pursuing a profit-driven agenda. Our proposals for reforms include liberation of regulators from drug company funding, That would be good. Why wouldn't you do that? Oh, because it wouldn't benefit the pharmaceutical industry, right? So now we know that's why we're not doing that. Taxation imposed on pharmaceutical companies to allow public funding of independent trials. Wouldn't that be amazing? Take some of the profits that they've made in the last couple of years and set up independent regulators that are not going to operate entirely at the behest of the pharmaceutical industries that they're supposed to be regulating. And perhaps most importantly, anonymized individual patient level trial data posted along with study protocols on suitably accessible websites so that third parties, self-nominated or commissioned by health technology agencies, could rigorously evaluate the methodology and trial results. What the British Medical Journal are asking for is absolute transparency. And the only reason you fear transparency is if you have something to hide. That's what you're told, isn't it? If you don't want your data hacked and harvested and controlled by the government, if you don't want to use an app as a passport, you're told, oh, well, if you've not done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to hide. That's an individual. An individual doesn't have a great capacity to impact society. Pharmaceutical giants spending that much money wrapping up their own regulation, wrapping up academia, controlling the media through finance, do potentially have a lot to hide. We require transparency of them. We require the kind of regulation that's being pitched here. And if that regulation isn't being imposed, you know why it is. Because the people that govern the pharmaceutical industry, whether it's at a localized industrial level or at a governmental level or at a global level, all have ties to the pharmaceutical industry, either at the level of people who are on the same boards or used to work there, and never going to impose that kind of regulation. The reason I appreciate this article is because we're continually told, although things are bad, although things are terrible, this is the best we can do, this is the best of all possible alternatives. What do you want, to live in communist Russia or communist China? No, I would like the pharmaceutical industry to be properly regulated. And as the British Medical Journal have just laid out, there are means by which that could be done. With the necessary changes to trial consent forms, participants could require trialists to make data freely available. The open and transparent publication of data are in keeping with our moral obligation to trial participants, real people who have been involved in risky treatment and have a right to expect that the results of their participation will be used in keeping with principles of scientific rigour. Industry concerns about privacy and intellectual property rights should not hold sway. What a fantastic insight from a credible and authentic publication that offers genuine suggestions for meaningful change. Do you see how when you open up this line of inquiry, the nature of the attacks that you will receive, you as individuals, us as a channel, anybody that criticizes this methodology, is that you are the problem. You are a conspiracy theorist. But the way that that's laid out shows that there is a necessity for transparency, a necessity for inquiry. And the reason that transparency and inquiry are shut down is because it would negatively impact the incentive of those corporations, not because it would be somehow dangerous. If the priority of the pharmaceutical industry is to make people fit and well and healthy, then why wouldn't they be transparent? Why wouldn't they open up to the kind of regulation suggested here? I think they would. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you don't subscribe already, subscribe right now. Only half of you subscribe. Subscribe immediately. And if you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one or this one on similar themes. Click here if you want to join my mailing list. But most importantly of all, please stay free.